Hi everyone, welcome to this round. Congratulations to all teams for breaking. On the motion, this House regrets post-colonial states adopting the language of the colonizers. I'd like to begin this debate by calling upon the Prime Minister.
You have to understand that countries that colonized are countries that have been abused by their colonizers, right? You have to understand that the things they're doing upon these countries are extremely bad and something that on our side, we think it's not worth sacrificing, right? Some characterization before I move on. Number one, post-colonized countries, right? What are they? They are basically countries that have been invaded without consent by their people, right? And basically, they have been invaded by other powerful countries. They've never ever gotten consent from them in the first place. Countries that this looks like are basically things like African countries that generally are colonized without their consent, right? Second thing, colonizers, right? There are countries that invade other countries for their own personal benefit, right? Things like how Japan invaded Malaysia for Malaysia's economic resources, natural resources, right? These are the type of things that colonizers look like, right? Second thing, you have to understand that this debate isn't a policy debate, right? It's a value judgment debate, judging the values of each world, where one world, it's a world where colonizers leave behind their language versus a world where colonizers don't leave behind their language, right? Now, what are the language of these colonizers, right? These language of colonizers are basically things like how, let's say when Japan invades Malaysia, right, leaves behind things like signposts of Japanese words, or for example, like a certain script of what their language is, or maybe a book given to one of the citizens, right? This is what it looks like, right? On our side, we think that we want to abolish that completely and prefer a world that this doesn't happen. I'll prove that later in my speech. Number three, I'll prove to you why colonization is generally bad, right? And how it brings more harm than good to everyone in that country, and how it generally brings terrible lives to these countries, right? So number one, colonizing other countries puts the countries that are being colonized in a place where, number one, it's most likely invaded, right? For example, I said before, it's most likely for their own benefit, and they cannot do their own trade, they cannot do their own deals, right? They cannot have their own economic little infrastructure in their own country, right? This looks like, for example, if I take one of you guys, I put you in my basement, I lock you up, sure, I lock you up, but I give you food, right? I give you food. Because you give a person that you personally locked down in their basement without their consent, is not justified why you should lock them down in the first place, right?
Point.
If you lock someone in your basement without their consent in the first place, it's already immorally justified, right? Right? And that's why we think that colonization is bad in the first place, right? And you also cannot take the benefits of, well, this colonization as something that's important, right? Because the colonization in itself is already immoral, right? And the benefits you gain from it isn't something that you generally can take it as something that's good for you, because generally you have to go through so much bad things and suffering just to get that benefit. I'll prove to you why that benefit is also bad, right? Now, with that out of the way, on to my argument of colonizers, right? So you have to understand, when you are invaded, right, you become more dependent on their language. The language they spread, things like Japanese, when Japan invaded Malaysia, right, you become more dependent on their language, right? And you have to adapt to their languages in order for you to be able to survive, right? Why is this bad, right? There are a few reasons, right? So when you need these languages to communicate in the first place, right, it becomes extremely harmful because, number one, it comes from the people that actually hurt you, right? Sure, you rely on the language that these people provided you to gain economic benefits, right? But we tell you that these economic benefits isn't justified, like I said before, when it comes from the people who hurt you, right? If I stab your mom and at the same time I give you money, I think that isn't justified. Sit down. The second reason is because the only people that are going to actually talk to you with these languages are people that actually hurted you in the first place, right? When the Japanese invaded Malaysia, if you use Japanese to talk, you won't be able to go to some African country and talk Japanese there, right? The only place you're allowed to use this language, the only place that you are able to use these languages is in places that the colonizers came from, right? And this is extremely harmful because you won't actually gain any economic benefits in the first place, right? And number three, you have to understand that, well, these colonizers don't actually want to help you, right? They only want your country for their natural resources, for their own personal benefit, right? And with this said, right, you have to understand that if you're going to talk to them about, let's say, I don't know, in Japanese or something, the most likely won't necessarily want to help you in the first place because they want to get rid of your natural resources, right? And of course, it's not exactly worth it, lah. Like, if you're willing, we think that on our side, it's not worth trading off your culture and your identity of your country just because you want to communicate with that person that isn't really going to help you in the first place, right? Before that, sure.
So what is the direct harm, or why do you think it's not beneficial? For example, Malaysia using English, which they were colonized by, to help them with trade and international trade, which they actually do in the status quo.
So you have to understand that, well, English isn't Malaysian normal language, right? Malaysia is known for their main language as Bahasa Melayu, right? And English is sort of like a minority, sort of like not as a popular language, right? This is extremely unbeneficial because number one, if you live in a world like that, you're generally more likely to be more you are generally more likely to only do business with people that speak English, right? The only reason why Malaysia is doing good right now is because these colonizers colonized so many countries until these countries are forced to use this language over and over again, and well, they create this sort of like little infrastructure thing. Our second speaker proved to you why that's bad. Now, let's look. No, sit down. So you have to understand that why are these post-colonized countries bad in the first place, right? Because number one, they don't actually leave any wealth for you, right? When Japan invaded Malaysia, they didn't leave like some sort of like a huge pile of money or anything like that, right? They didn't leave anything like that. The only thing that they did was they came here, took our natural resources, and flew off, right? And because of that, we think that's extremely harmful and extremely bad for you, right? Because it gives you, sit down, it gives you an illusion of benefits that you receive and generally don't receive in the first place, right? They tell you that number one, you get economic benefits, but you actually don't, right? Because the only people you're going to talk to in the first place are people that speak Japanese, right? And this is extremely harmful because it gives you an illusion of benefits, right? Things like the Spanish Reconquista, right? You have to understand also that these colonizers only have the mindset of that they want to spread their philosophy and their ideologies, right, from their own home countries, right? Like things like, the Spanish Inquisition, where they invaded other countries to spread their philosophy, their culture, and killing people that don't believe in them, right? This is also evident in things like the war between America and the Soviet Union, right? Where the Soviet Union is trying to spread their philosophy and their ideologies too, right? Which caused things like wars, right? And this is extremely bad, something where we want to stop right on our side. And when you colonize, you think you're given an illusion to think that it's okay, right? Because you gain all these benefits, right? But in actual fact, you don't actually get these benefits, and we think it's not exactly worth it to trade off your culture and everything like that, right? What have I told you today? I've told you number one, it's not worth it for you to trade off your culture and trade off everything you have in your country, what you stand for that few benefits that probably won't even matter in the future, right? I've also told you that when you invade people, it's bad. And number three, I've also told you enough characterization. I told you why colonization is bad and basically why it's generally not worth it, right? What propose?
Thank you very much. I'd like to call upon the new position.
I think the biggest thing that we can give these countries that have been colonized is the liberty to actually choose whether they want to take advantage of this language and make the best out of it for themselves in the future if they do so. Today's from opening opposition, we're going to prove you one thing, and we believe we will today's debate. If we can prove to you that in this world, that these countries can benefit from these languages which they have adopted, we take today's debate, and likewise for the side government. But firstly, a few things to clarify, okay? Because opening government fails to understand the characterization of how this adaptation works. It's not just like leaving forms of literature behind and stuff like that. It's like the languages that these countries tend to actually adopt in a long time. For example, like Malaysia, where we speak English as a second language and stuff like that. Just minor clarification. But largely the rebuttals from his speech, right? Because he gave some form of a principle justification to why it's not principally justified for us to take this up, but not really engaging with why it isn't actually principally justified. They have actually directly clash, but a short form of rebuttal. For example, he said it's not precisely justified for us to accept this, but not saying why it's okay for these countries to accept other forms of colonialism, for example, like for their legal system, which is based on these languages, their education, their social structure, and so many things are already built up upon. And why he feels our culture is suddenly going to run away just by us trading off this language and not trading up all forms of other forms of colonialism that have helped this country. So we don't see that. And secondly, we don't see that direct link in how exactly adapting a language is actually going to help us lose our culture, because we can see in Malaysia, language is just like a form of medium where we can just use to pursue other forms of culture. We don't see how countries just straight away lose their form of culture. We don't see why countries can't co-opt their own languages and the languages brought upon them by the countries we colonized, which was not also clarified by them. But secondly, the last thing about where he wants to trade off this efficiency for culture, which I'll integrate into my arguments. Okay, so firstly, the first argument coming from the side opening opposition is the part, like my first argument is about how like adaptation isn't a necessary form of colonialism. Now, why do we say so? It's because we need to understand that the ideology of a country that is set is very different from the language that is put upon its countries. Now, why do I say so? Because what we need to understand is how he accused of saying that okay, ideologies can spread through language. We don't see this intrinsically happening, because we see that, for example, like ideologies may stand in, for example, forms of like social structure, or like, for example, like I don't know whether these countries like made it to a dictatorship or to a democracy, but we don't see that happening in language, because when we see that what happens in the status quo to countries that have been post-colonized is they just use these languages, and the best thing that they're allowed to do so is they have an option to choose how exactly they want to use these languages. What do I mean by this? It means that, for example, like certain countries actually choose to adapt it as their first language, and certain countries choose to adapt it as a second language. The conclusion of this argument is that these countries still have the option and still have the choice of what they actually want to do with this language, whether they want to use it as their first language, whether they want to adapt it as their second language, or how they actually want to use it in their daily life. So when we see that countries actually have an option of what they want to do with language they were colonized by, it is no more a form of colonialism, because they have the option to do so with that language. Yeah, sure, closing.
Are you fighting for adoption of language or adaptation of language?
I believe that it's somewhat similar in a way, because if they want to adopt it and they want to adapt it to whatever parts of their life they want to, which benefits them, we're totally fine with that. Okay, so yeah, but secondly, why this is like really important and why like they should actually really adapt this is because it's part of the history of this country. We don't see why you saying that because they were colonized, they somehow can like just like shun off this history. Now, why is it important for these countries to accept the fact that they've been colonized and to accept preferred adapting to these forms of languages and accepting the history? Number one, because it's a crucial part of the development of this nation. It is important for these countries to accept the fact and to move on from the point to remember that we were developed from a colonized country, because it is part of this country's identity. It is the part of every citizen born in a country's identity to know that they were colonized by this particular country. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're continuing colonized. It just means that you can go out and say, okay, fine, we have been colonized. This is a part of our culture. The very fact that Singapore still like uses BM as like their national language doesn't really mean that, you know, people there like, are still colonized by Malaysia or still colonized by language. It just means that they're accepting it as part of the language and moving on from the past in the history. You setting a value that, oh, you have to like, you cannot like any part of the language if you are to not be colonized, is totally false, because then they're going to go out in the world and they're going to be rejecting everything from the language. You're going to think, oh, if I read an English book, I'm somehow, you know, jumping back to the other side and I'm not like patriotic to myself. I find this highly problematic, because all we are understanding is that how a language does not really spread an ideology, and this is what side opening government really has to clarify on how actually this trade-off of them losing its culture happens in the first place. Hold on, I'll accept you in a while. But lastly, to my last contention on how actually these countries actually develop better, because this is when we prioritize what these countries want over what you think is best for them. We believe that these countries have the choice to do what they want with this language. So why do I say that it's actually like we don't regret these countries adapting? Because we need to understand is post-colonial of all these wars was the Industrial Revolution. We believe that majority of these countries, which actually colonized these countries, were the major like countries who actually pioneered the Industrial Revolution. And the very fact that these countries actually had the avenue to adapt or had the choice to use these languages in their developing of or rebuilding of the nation actually gave them the opportunity to actually enter the Industrial Revolution, to actually have to make a chance to actually rebuild themselves. And they accusing these countries of not having some form of moral obligation is totally false, because what we see that many forms of post-colonial countries still like actually pay back to the countries they colonize, still give some form of welfare or like help or aid to these countries which they colonize. And this will only be even better when we still have the opportunity to communicate and adapt to them. And yeah, I'll take closing if you want right now.
Singapore was colonized by British, not Malaysia. So what happens then? This is more superior compared to other languages in that country. Solve this.
I don't understand the POI, but the values of my speech still apply to that. If Singapore still adapts English and they want to use it in like whatever ways they want to, it's fine. If let's say they don't want to use English and they want to stick to BM, it's also fine with them. I don't exactly understand what the PR is meant to do, but the conclusion to my argument of how they actually develop better, like the very fact that this actually allows them to progress from where they were colonized. Now, why is this important? Because I already told you how their legal system and, for example, the education system is built based upon these languages, and it's highly contingent on how these languages function, okay? So if they had not adopted these particular cultures, they would have had it so much more difficult to rebuild these structures, to rebuild how certain places have been already laid out for them. And we see highly beneficial for countries, for them, like even in Malaysia, where the very fact that we adapted English and actually put it into our legal system before we later shifted it to BM, when we chose to do that, actually allowed us to lay the platform to follow the English system, and then later find out, okay, we like the system, but we don't want to use the language that we're speaking, so we changed it back to BM. This is how we allow countries, and we don't regret the very fact that they were able to take advantage of the fact that they were colonized to actually use these languages to benefit them for their development. I don't see a world in which languages that intrinsically take away the culture of a particular country. I don't see a world in where this colonialism spreads into these countries which adapt English or Portuguese or stuff like that. But I do see a world in which these countries have developed from that, still use English to develop themselves, and still hold on to that because it makes them a better nation. For all these reasons, I beg to oppose.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, Prime Minister.
Being colonized by certain countries is not something that any country wants to go to. We understand that this is traumatic, and this is something that people want to escape from. This is something that colonized countries would like to escape from the fact, right? We don't think that in the same way that kidnapped victims don't want to ever relate back to their kidnappers, in the same way, colonized countries should never want to relate back and still have remnants of that past with their colonizers to begin with, right? A few clarifications coming out from OO, right? So they try to tell us that this is about choice, about whether or not you want to accept the benefits. Understand that today's debate is not whether or not you want to give them the choice. Today's debate is about that choice itself. Today's debate is about whether or not it's beneficial for countries to adopt that, not whether or not the choice is there. The choice is there. We are just saying that the choice of not accepting those benefits is better in the long term, right? So we think that the main chunk of their argument is how you don't have to accept all of the all forms of culture, and by accepting languages doesn't mean you accept culture, right? We don't think that this is the case, first of all, because slowly and surely, as you accept culture, as you accept more mediums of that of your colonized nation, of your colonizers, then slowly and surely your country adapts towards the social norms of your colonizers. But even if that isn't the case, there are still remnants of colonizers when you have the language still present, right? We don't think that there's escape from your colonizers. We don't think that you gain your full independence, like your full philosophical independence from your colonizers, right? And they also try to talk about economic growth, and this is integrated into my main argument today. So economic growth and development, right? So that's the main part of side opening opposition's case, right? We tell you that economic growth through the help of your colonizers isn't something that is likely going to happen, because first of all, colonizers aren't that well-to-do. Chris aren't that moral to begin with, right? Chris has already told you why colonizers are immoral, why colonizing is immoral to begin with, why colonizers will have ill intent towards the countries that the countries that they colonize, right? So therefore, we don't think that colonizers, when they leave, are likely going to want to help these countries to begin with. Meaning they don't leave back much to help with. All they leave back is like remnants of like buildings that you can never use, like churches in Malacca, or like the language that you will never be able to use, besides the country's besides your very own colonizers that you are trying to escape from to begin with, right? And before I move on, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so if you do not want anything to do with these countries and you feel that language is still a form of colonialism, would you also these countries regret like taking aid from these countries because, oh, we don't want anything to do with you, we don't want your help because, you know, we're just going to take everything from you, we won't take your aid, we won't take your help?
So first of all, I don't think aid is something that colonizers will likely give in the first place, but even if they do, we think that colonizers will only, like, the countries that colonize to begin with are countries that only want to help if there's something in benefit to them. So no, we don't want to accept your aid if it comes in the expense of people wanting, if people wanting to exploit you in the first place, right? That's the main bit that side opening opposition has to tackle. Why exactly colonizers have never, why colonizers have not, don't have the moral capacity to want to help these want to help these countries to begin with, right? Colonizers take everything away from the colonizers without giving anything back. That is the philosophy and why people colonize to begin with, right? Understand the main reason why countries colonize other countries in the first place is to gain land, is to gain access. Is the main reason why the Europeans invaded Africa to begin with. They wanted their materials, they wanted their people as slaves, they wanted their land, all these sort of things. They didn't want to, their thought process wasn't going to Africa to give them aid, right? So these things, even if in status quo they do try to give aid, we don't think that it is beneficial, that is solely beneficial for the third part, for the colonized countries anyway, right? So we don't think the trade-off is worth it when you sacrifice all the things that you have to just for the potential economic growth that will never happen anyway, since your colonizers never leave anything back to begin with. Yeah, sure.
We don't think this is a debate about whether or not colonialism was good or bad. What is your direct harm, and why is it actually that heavy in compared to the benefits that you can reap out of adopting these kinds of languages in the first place? Please respond to that.
All right, so that's exactly what I was going to talk about in my next level analysis. So what if, even if economic development happens, even if economic growth happens, why is that still harmful towards these countries, right? So the way that things will work when you go back to these countries is that when you go back to that philosophy, right, is you go back to the way things were before. You go back to relying on your colonizers. You go back into wanting to be in a position where you have to solely rely on your colonizers and you can never gain independence from that, right? It's not enough to just tell your colonizers that it was immoral to begin with, right? That colonizing is immoral so that they feel bad and then help you. Because what you have to understand is when colonizers see the impact of colonizing these colonizing these countries, what happens is they see that, first of all, if economic growth does happen, is that we gain, so we help them, therefore there's no remorse there, therefore there's less likelihood that you will feel remorse and want to help them in the future to repay back that remorse. But secondly, more importantly, is that you see that your culture spread, you see that your own philosophy is spread, you see that like for example in the Spanish Inquisition, you spread Christianity better, therefore there's no incentive for you to feel bad about what you did. Sure, you feel like, okay, I harmed some people, but in the process of harming people, your mentality is that, oh, okay, but I harm people, but I also gain, I also spread my culture, which under their paradigm is something that is also equally beneficial, right? So we don't think that colonization will be viewed as harmful under that side, under these circumstances. Under their side, colonization is viewed as beneficial and helpful towards the colonizers. And sure, it might feel that way, but we don't want it to feel that way. So it defeats the liberty of independence from the colonized countries to begin with. They need to rely back on the colonizers themselves. They never gain independence from these countries. They can never be free from that colonizers. So if they fail, we allow them to do so because at least then they gain independence.
Thank you very much.
I'm personally like grateful that we actually got colonized and we adopted these languages of these states who colonized us, because I think at the end of the day I wouldn't even be able to like come to a debate competition and like say all these kinds of things, because all these kinds of things wouldn't even be able to like exist under the world of side government in the first place, right? So before I move on to the rebuttals and contentions, a few clarifications. Firstly, we don't think this is a debate about whether or not colonizing is something that's good or bad, which is the main crux of side OG's in today's debate. We don't think they're actually focusing or tackling the issue of whether or not adopting these languages either harm or benefit these kinds of states in the first place. They still haven't answered that question, therefore they automatically lose today's debate. Secondly, we think that they are principally inconsistent in the sense that they say we're not fully independent because we use languages, but they're still okay with other forms of colonization. For example, like the laws that we take, the kinds of education that we take up, all these things have some form of colonization in them because we took it from people who did colonize us in the past. So we don't think that in principle itself, they're not consistent in what they're trying to fight for at the end of the day, which is also the main reason why they lose to this debate. Before I move on to the contention, right? A few points of rebuttals. Firstly, right, they told you that countries that are colonized are being abused, like no consent. Like when they were colonized, they were being forced to do things that like become slaves, like no consent to being exploited, and because of this, it is bad. So we cannot adopt that language. Okay, we get it, like colonization is bad, but they still haven't proved to you the link as to how this actually relates to using the language, because my Alor has already come up here and told you how using the language of these colonizers actually benefited us in the future, in status quo in itself. Like it allowed us to become more developed, it allowed us to catch up with the world in the first place. Them saying colonization is bad is not a justification as to whether or not these languages are bad in the first place, because if they still want to talk about consent, we tell you, in status quo itself, we still do have the choice of whether or not we want to use English or Bahasa Melayu as our language of communication, which was explained by my LO but wasn't responded in DPM. So secondly, right, we told you that they said that it's not justified to take it up because they heard you in the first place. The first response to this, we tell you that if it wasn't for these states in the first place, we wouldn't even know we wouldn't even know how to utilize these kinds of benefits on our own. Sure, like for example, Japan exploited us because of our natural resources. But if it wasn't for Japan in the first place, we don't think we were in a position where that we would actually understand or be able to use these kinds of benefits on our own, because we were just that underdeveloped. Because of the influx of these kinds of colonizers, it allowed us to be on a platform where we can reap these kinds of benefits that would, under their side, would never even happen in the first place. So lastly, like the idea of how they won't get help, right? But we don't think it's about whether or not these kinds of countries who want to give help or want to give aid towards the state that they colonize, because under their side, what they're basically saying that anything that if they even offer to give aid or offer to give help, they'll still reject it nonetheless. The comparative under our side is we actually now, when we adopt these kinds of languages, we know the situations that we're going to get into. But like I'll expound this more in my arguments later on. Before I go on to an opening.
What kind of benefits did Japan give Malaysia after they left? We don't see any direct contributions that Japan could give Malaysia anyway.
The basic benefit that they gave Malaysia was the realization that we had these kinds of natural resources to begin with, because Malaysia had no fucking clue what the fuck we had to use in our country. Right? We didn't know how to use these kinds of benefits to develop our country in the first place. If it wasn't for colonizers, then we wouldn't have these kinds of development that we have in status quo. This is the basic form of benefit that still applies under their side, but they also need to talk about how this relates to language at the end of the day. Yeah. So, like I said, right, at the end of the day, the debate, how the debate is won, is boiled down to one major thing: whether or not there is a direct harm in adopting these languages, and whether or not those direct harm that side government wants to pose is actually heavier than the benefits we say we can give. But before I go on, yeah, sure.
Yes or no, Japan burned almost every single natural resources when they left Malaysia.
Okay, yeah, sure. we agree to that, but it's a trade-off that we're willing to take, because at the end of the day, it led us to this situation where we are developed, and you also have to concede to that fact. Because at the end of the day, we didn't even know how to use these kind of things in the first place. So the benefits that that is brought by adopting these kind of languages, a few things, right? Well, extending from my leader of opposition, I'm going to talk to you about how it empowers people even more, and how this, at the end of the day, relates to aid or diplomatic relations when it comes to relations with other countries. So how does it empower people, right? We tell you that it empowers people because at the end of the day, like for example, when British came and introduced like the British language, it also came with education. It also came with laws that were implemented into these kinds of states. We tell you, it empowers these people because it also gave them the form of education that allowed them to further develop in their own individual ways. Without these kinds of colonization, without the adaptation of these languages, we wouldn't even understand the kind of education that they were going to give. Because in this particular period of time, we have to consider the fact that Britain was already like a part of this pioneer movement of industrial revolution and all these kind of things. So they were already in the process of being developed. If we did not adopt to these kinds of if we didn't adopt to their languages, we don't think that we could have given ourselves better education, or like if we couldn't even have caught up with the world of industrial revolution in the first place. So all the kinds of development that we have today wouldn't even be possible at the end of the day. So secondly, how does it extend to aid and diplomatic relations? We tell you that it extends to this because at least now we're able to like communicate with the rest of the world. Because one fact that they have to concede to is, even if let's say we didn't adopt this language, the rest of the world would be speaking in this language. Like the industrial revolution was also like based on the English language in itself. So if we hadn't adopted this language in the first place, we would have been left out of this in the first place. But okay, we'll take them on the worst case scenario. Like even if they want to exploit us in these diplomatic relations or in these aids, we tell you at least now it gives us a better platform to be more informed, right? To better understand what exactly they're trying to get out of us. It also gives us a platform to understand what we can reap out of them, because now we are able to understand what the fuck they're saying. So at the end of the day, we give these benefits to you. We tell you that these benefits only arises because you adopted this the language of these colonizers in the first place. If CG doesn't manage to prove to you there's a direct harm, and that this direct harm is so harmful that it outweighs our benefits, then we take to this debate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Member of Government. Yeah.
The colonizers have left, but the colonization remains. This is the world we live in today. This is the world we live in, where the British came and went, but we are still debating here in English today. The DLO came up and said that he is so thankful that we are here debating in English. Well, I tell you, I am regretful that this kind of fruitful debate is not happening in Bahasa Melayu, that so many private universities readily offer English literature but do not offer Bahasa Melayu literature. I tell you, it is regretful that the brain drain happens when our economy is so accessible to the US powers, to the UK powers, to our former colonizers, where people just leave because they can, because they've been trained and brought up in English, they've studied in English, they've been trained in English, and they can just so easily go and work for the English. Now, we tell you that is what happens at the point in which you adopt a colonizer's language in a post-colonial society. We from side closing government will uniquely prove to you that language brings about detriment in terms of rebuilding post-colonial societies, and that is how we take today's debate. What will I give to you today? I will give to you how this economic benefits that has been main clash of this debate is actually very, very ill-motivated and actually brings about harm in the long run. How this economic intervention by colonizers through this leisure, through adopting that language, is actually harmful because it takes away the self-identity of a nation. And then I will give you the unique point of how Unity and preservation of culture only exists at the point a post-colonial society goes back to its roots and rebuilds on the platform of its national language that it had way before these colonizers came and took over. So before that, a few rebuttals, right? The thing that it somehow empowers people, that they give us education in the short run, we can suddenly learn, and then they give us laws in the short run, all that. Yes, we agree. In the short run, amazing, we can learn. But here's the thing. These are artificial. They are not organic change or organic evolution that happened in the way in which it happened in British society. It is not the way it happened in the American society. It is not the way it happened in the French society. These people evolved inside their own society, came up with their own education, something that is compatible with their own roots, and that is how they became the colonizers, because they were superior, because they understood their roots and grew up in their own language. Before that, yes.
If adopting the language means that improved livelihoods and living standards for developing nations, why is that so bad?
Because you screw them over in the long run, which is what I'm telling you, that we are okay with living in a subpar level in the short run if you have to live as virtual neo-British slaves in the long run, which is what I'm coming to in a little bit. So then they say that, laws, right? So we tell you, if you want to adopt the template of the British law and live as practically a British citizen, at that point you concede that the colonizers have not left, and the only reason why English law was able to be absorbed into our system is because and only because we continue to use English in our legal system. If at that point we had thrown English out of our legal system, this would not have happened, because we would have been forced to draft our own laws by Malaysian lawmakers and understand the culture of Malaysia and incorporate it into our society. Now, enough of rebuttals, right? Let's come to substantives. Why under our side preservation of culture exists? Now here is where we will prove to you the direct link between using using a language and how it affects culture, because they want to come up here and take the benefit of saying that we're not adopting a new language, we're just adapting our lifestyle to incorporate this new language. We tell you at the point at which you're adopting a new language, the flawed example that they use, Singapore, is exactly what I'm talking about. At the point in which parents are so readily volunteering their children to go and study English that the government has to say you mandatorily have to take a second language, which is your mother tongue. We tell you at that point culture has been screwed over. People no longer want to learn their mother language. You are literally becoming a Western society. So that is bad. We tell you a few levels of analysis as to why preservation of culture exists on our side. What does culture look like? Culture looks like traditions. Culture looks like festivals. Culture looks, most importantly, in literature, the very heirloom of society. And what is literature written in? Literature is written in the national language of a society. Malay literature is written in Malay literature, and it's an essential part of Malaysian heritage. British literature was written in English, which is an essential part of their heritage. What happens now? At the moment in which we take English in precedence over Malaysian language and Malaysian society, what happens is that their literature infiltrates here. What happens is the Malay speaker who used to pantun on weekends now speaks English, and he may still speak Malay, but he's no longer pantuning on the weekend. The urban guy who spoke in Malay but never really pantun, he's not going to speak Malay anymore. He's just going to speak in English. That is how culture erodes. Because at the point in which you take away language, which connects the individual to culture, you take away that link and therefore erode culture. Now we tell you, language is so entrenched in culture that it's not easily to just swap out English and Malay and somehow the culture still remains. It's a very flawed assumption to make. Lastly, before I won't take MOPOS, I'll take.
Why is it so important that you put people secondary and the culture that you wanted to preserve first?
What are you without your culture? What are you at the point in which you become a shell of a nation that is just willing to take on the constructs of society of the British colonizers and just live to be their slaves in the long run, which is what I'm coming to under our economic benefits, right? What does this economic benefit actually look like? The issue we're talking about is access. Access into economy is dependent on the language which that economy uses. Look at China. Yes, they were not colonized, but what I'm talking about here is that the fact that their economy is in Chinese language, that they were a closed-door economy for far long, and how it actually benefited them. What we want here is, well, okay, if you close off the economy in the short run, what actually happens is instead of all these British companies coming in and training our people to be British employees, and later MNCs coming in and taking advantage, because the banking sector, the financial sector, the insurance sector, all this will be readily accessible to them because they are far more efficient in using English as an administrative language as opposed to how the original society could have ever been. Therefore, they come in, and what happens now? What happens now is economic colonialization. This will happen because these people are far more proficient in English, or far more proficient in the language, which is their national language. What we want is a closed-door system where these people can actually come up themselves, and therefore, in the long run, when they do open their doors, they are in a far more better bargaining position, and therefore they will not be screwed over and not be taken advantage over. This does not happen under side opposition, where that state economy is molded into a mold that is essentially just to serve the interests of the British society in the long run. And how does self-identity play into this, right? At the point in which the presence of the colonizers are there, in the point in which you talk English every day, what happens then? You feel a link to these countries. You think that they are a big brother to you and they're always there to help you. What happens then? At the point in which any international issue arises, you are more incentivized to go with them because they've been there, they've helped me, they've given me laws, they've done all this. You lose your self-autonomy, you lose your self-identity, and therefore we are not ready to trade off what a nation is and what a society is just because it is easier to talk English in the short run. With that, now being proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for the opposition.
Yeah.
Understand that there is a big disparity between post-colonial states and first world nations. Sure, they extracted wealth, and sure, to an extent, they did oppress some people, right? But we cannot turn back time, and what happened still happened. The question now becomes, how do post-colonial states move on from that and back on their feet after? We think that it happens better in opposition. There are a couple of responses, right? The first thing that they argue is how the adoption of this language creates dependency towards the colonized state. You think that regardless of whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, dependency still exists, right? Government is in denial. We tell you that sure, maybe temporarily you will have to depend on these nations, but over time this dependency gradually decreases because these countries can now stand on their own feet. We think that adopting the language is necessary to bridge the intellectual and technological gap between colonized and colonizing states. We think that it only happens if you are able to adopt their main language, right? The second thing they argue is how economic benefits are not worth trading off your culture. We don't see where preservation of culture comes first as opposed to increasing living standards and livelihoods of people on the ground, especially in developing nations, the rural areas of Vietnam and things like so, right? We didn't hear any proper justification as to why you have to constantly promote Malay literature as opposed to helping Malay Alliance and things like so. If you want to learn Malay literature, please go ahead. But there are people who want to put food on the table and businesses who want to expand and will require the adoption of English. In order to do so, we think that these are the people who deserve the right to progress. The third thing that they argue is how they're willing to live in subpar conditions as long as they're not indirectly colonized. We think that it's easy for you to say because you're all in the capital city of Kuala Lumpur. The people in opposition that we're trying to protect are people in rural areas of other struggling developing nations who are still struggling to get back on their feet after colonization, right? For example, India, Thailand, Vietnam, you name it. Government doesn't truly understand the gravity of living in subpar conditions. They don't understand the struggles that these people face on a daily basis. These are the people that we're trying to lift from poverty that you abandoned in the first place. Fourth thing that they argue is how they are willing to have short-term loss just to have culture. Our response to this is, we don't think it's short-term economic loss, right? We think that you prolong the suffering of people on the ground and actually hamper the progress that businesses and people on the ground want to make. Then I'll further explain this in my arguments later. So clarification, right? We think that in this debate, we're going to focus on English because it's the main language used globally and all benefits still apply either way. So moving on to my first issue, right? Why did colonized states adopt the language in the first place? We think that colonizers, firstly, they actively educate people on the ground to explaining ideas like democracy, creating infrastructure like ports and trains, and also having technology requires English as a medium, right? Second, it also plays a crucial role in negotiations, for example, in gaining independence. Being able to interact and compromise with the colonizing nations means that they are able to actually gain independence due to the existence of a common language. What does this signal, right? We think that colonized states realize the necessity of learning their colonizers' language as a kickstarter for progress and liberty to govern your own country. This is precedence that shows that in order for you to actually gain liberty, you have to first be able to interact with your colonized nations, right? This is an important precedence that we have to acknowledge. We'll further apply to my other arguments as well. So why does adopting language is important for further development of post-colonial nations, right? So let's look at how post-colonial, what do colonizing states look like now? They look like London with big houses and big infrastructure with booming industries that were fueled by colonized states, right? And there's a big concentration of wealth in these nations. What do colonized states look like? They look like Malaysia, Thailand, and India, who are still trying to catch up to the development of the first world countries and still trying to get back on their feet. We tell you that this gap is huge, right? We can see that there is dependency. Here's how we help getting back on their feet easier and bridge the disparity faster. You know that firstly, English has become the medium in all sorts of aspects, for example, academia and commerce. What does this mean, right? English allows you to access the globalized world. The language no longer becomes a barrier for you to access as much as information as possible. So I'll divide this into two, right? Academia and commerce. Firstly, academia. Let's admit, right? You'll never be able to extract much from Utusan or Berita Harian as much as you can from The Economist or New York Times, right? The content that you get will never be of the same quality and diversity of perspective in comparison to Western journalism. That's something that we have to admit, especially in countries where media freedom is restricted. That's when English is more than ever necessary in order for us to actually bridge the intellectual gap that happens in these nations. So another thing is lots of medical journals and intellectual discourses involve English, and we think that collaboration of minds between international people require English as a medium because that's generally what people use. If you refuse to use language as a medium to understand, that's when you further segregate yourself from global progress. I think that your intellectuals will never be able to engage on an international level. So the conclusion to this argument is people from Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam can also have seats within the United Nations, can also be the top 10 surgeons in the world, and can also have a quite high quality workforce. This can never happen under government where you refuse to understand that English is an important medium for us to do so. We think that under our side, it's easier for us to be on par with international other nations because we are actually able to interact on that basis. No, thank you. So moving on to my second part of my argument, right, which is commerce. We don't see a lot of local businesses being able to penetrate into international market without the adoption of English, right? Two things. Firstly, it's hard to have joint effort between businesses if you cannot communicate your interests with them. Second, consumers respond better to products that they can understand. For example, Innisfree or Fashion Valley. These are large Korean and also Malaysian local brands that have managed to penetrate the international market due to the adoption of English, right? What are the impacts of this? Three things. First, it managed to provide thousands of job opportunities for people on the ground. What does this mean? It lifts people out of poverty and gives people a chance to actually enter the global market and allows gives an incentive for entrepreneurs to actually work hard and enter the global market as opposed to your work. But they feel like no matter what they do, they'll never be able to penetrate. I think that opposition offers them a chance to actually expand their innovations and share their creations with the world. Second, we also allow expansion of businesses and mean that they can garner more profit because now they can access other countries as well and sell more, and hence being able to garner more profit, which then is channeled to citizens and also businesses as well. The third thing that happens is we manage to promote local culture as well to an extent. For example, Fashion Valley selling Malay attire overseas, or Dux Plus Hari Raya shawls. We think that is how you promote local businesses as well. So we don't think it's actually colonization. It's just a temporary dependency in order to have independency later in the future because you managed to stand on your own feet. So understand this thing before you try to tell us that we are indirectly being colonized, because we tell you that this form of adopting language is actually a medium for us to stand on our own later and become stronger and on par with the nations that we used to oppress us. We think that this is how we get back to these countries even better. We lift local businesses, we lift people on the ground. That's how we improve, and that's why we win.
Okay, thank you. You want me to wait?
It's really sad to hear that O's entire case was defending colonization in the first place. So what is colonization? What does colonization looks like? We look at this in two ways. One happening in most Asian countries and one happening in most African countries. So let's look at Africa first. What happens when Africa was colonized? And what is happening now? What does Africa look like now? Let's look at Ivory Coast. They were colonized by the French. They speak French every day. Most of their citizens speak French. But look at Ivory Coast, ridden with civil wars. They have almost no resources left because of colonization. Now let's look at Malaysia before colonization. Let's look at Malacca. Let's go back to the 1400s. Malacca was a powerhouse in Asia itself. So what happens then? The Dutch came and Malacca stopped being a powerhouse. It actually stopped the development of Asia
Asian influence as a whole. But let's assume that colonization brought development. But what is the danger to that? What is the danger to colonization as a whole? And I cannot believe that we are actually debating whether colonization is good or bad, because everyone knows how disgusting colonization is. What are the effects of the countries? We look at this in Africa. We look at this in Malaysia itself. What are the effects of Japanese invasion? What did Japan left for us? They left for us women that have been raped. They left for us no resources because they burned it, they burned it in self-importance. And let's look at Britain. The divide and conquer rule that Britain enforced in every single colonized state that they did. So I don't really see how opening opposition's case on how colonization is actually good, and that has been expanded upon time and time again by the LO. But before that, LO,
okay, colonization is very bad. Just tell me why your world is now better off with them post-colonial now speaking their African language rather than speaking the French language.
Yeah, okay, so like I was responding to the DLO's case on how colonization is good, and going to how if they speak African, or if they speak their own African language, or if they speak Malay, or if they speak Thai, that it'll be better. So why is it better? So what did Dinesh tell you? Dinesh told you that in the long run, when they speak their own national language, what happens then? We look at Japan, we look at Korea, we look at China. They do not put emphasis on learning English or learning other foreign languages. What they did was they put emphasis on their own national language, and now they have a booming economy. So what happens then? Why does this happen? This happens at a point in which when you close down, when you do a closed door economy, when Nike cannot come to Vietnam and open sweatshops that oppresses the people in Vietnam, that do not follow labor laws in Vietnam. Why? Because they are desperate for help of a colonizing power, of the power of the West, the economic power of the West. So what is the harm to this? What is the harm to this? Yes, maybe they put food on the table for the first 5 years, but what happens when they decide to leave? They have no independence whatsoever. They can't sustain themselves. So what happens then? The entire narrative of colonization, of using the language of your colonizer, is good enough. And I think both opposing benches need to realize that not all colonizers use the same language. We look at the entire ASEAN community in the first place. Indonesia was invaded by a different colonizing power. Myanmar was invaded by a different colonizing power. So what happens then? We create ASEAN. We do not even need a single language, but we could communicate well with each other. We look at the UN Security Council. None of them, all of them were put emphasis on their own national language, and they don't use a single powerful language to put themselves in the world. So let's look at what LO said. LO said adaptation isn't colonization. Why is this wrong? So at a point in which when you put more emphasis on English literature, or you put more emphasis on English songs or on English arts and culture, what happens then? You forget all your hikayat hang tuas. You forget your own Malay classical stories, Malay classical literatures. So what happens then? You lose culture. So and then closing opposition came up and said, we're okay with people losing their culture as long as they are not screwed over in the long run. Dinesh came and tell you that they are not screwed over in the long run. Economically, they will be better if they use their own national language. So the entire dependency on OO's case was that colonization was good, and that when you use the language of colonizers, you won't get screwed over, and that if you accept a few of their colonialist system, then they should win the entire debate. We tell you this is wrong, because at the point in which when you're forced to use the English legal system, when you cannot draft your own laws as a base, what happens then? You create an unstable country. Let's go to CO now. They say that fishermen will be hurt in the long run, but we don't see how this harm does not happen in their world, because at the point in which where the fishermen catch the fish for 5 years, the fishermen still can't speak English, because people in rural areas, they tend to not speak English. We look at Malaysia itself. You go to a rural area, most people there speak very, very minimum level of English or no English at all. What they do is they speak more Malay. So what happens when you speak more of your national language? These fishermen will actually benefit more, because the point in which when they decide to go to KL, when someone from Kelantan decides to go to KL, there's less of a social divide. But if you see that guy cannot speak English, you don't think he's dumb. You just think, okay, like maybe he didn't learn English. That's okay. There's less social divide in our world. In the world of closing opposition, there'll be more social divide. There won't be unity as a whole. So what did closing government bring to today's debate? Closing government told you that it is principally justified to preserve your own culture, because at a point in which where you actually benefit in the long run, when you preserve your own culture, when you have a self-identity, when you don't forget who you are, when you don't forget who Hang Tuah is. So what is the benefit to preservation of your own culture? So at a point in which when you preserve your own culture, you expand your culture to the whole world. You tell this is Malay literature, like it. So what happens then? We look at Korea. When they expand their own culture to the world, they create a big social economic boom where people love their culture. Then Dinesh also told you that there will be self-identity in our world, that we won't follow the huge mob of colonizers before. We don't take their word for law. So what happens then? You create your own self-identity. You become more independent from your colonizing power. So when colonization does not exist in your world, you believe that it will be a better world. So side with side closing government, side with the side that is against colonization as a whole, because it is disgusting. It's disgusting. The opening opposition clearly defended colonization. Side with closing government. Never been prouder to propose.
Thank you very much.
Post-colonial states have already been struggling in getting the progress and success they have been wanting from the very start, and we can see that their struggle is only contingent upon the language that they speak. And on our side, we better help them get all these benefits, because we adapt those languages that they spoke in order for them to get those benefits. But before I move on to issues regarding this debate, firstly, some rebuttals. We tell you that CG has been too convenient in not responding to all the benefits that we have propagated to you on how in commerce and academia and how they can get all these direct benefits by speaking the same language. So therefore, they didn't really engage with all material that was brought by my member. But moving on to the first rebuttal, firstly, the idea on how isn't moral for you to adapt the language of the colonizers, right? We tell you this is untrue. We feel sorry for all these countries that have to go through suffering and how their infrastructure was brought down due to the colonizers. We tell you because of this, it was a stepping stone for them to getting all the benefits that they were at the end of the day. We can't change history, but we can acknowledge it and make it better for the future of that country itself. Second rebuttal on how they try to tell you on culture identity and why it should be preserved. We tell you that culture can be preserved if you actually when you actually put it into an international level, where you promote your businesses to global businesses, where you can actually promote culture. We tell you culture is still preserved on the outside. Only we tell you that you have to trade off that point in time in which you have to getting to global businesses and such. We tell you that even if culture was be put to secondary, we tell you the people in the poverty and people who are in roads who do not get access to job opportunities are far more important than the culture that you try to preserve. Third rebuttal, why they try to tell you on the situations in Africa and how they are like not in good condition, even if they spoke the language, right? We tell you that even if these things happen, we see that even like people aid industries coming to help them, and because of them speaking the same language and how they try to talk to like agencies to actually help them. So we tell you that it's not their fault like wars are happening in Africa and such. Fourth rebuttal, how they try to tell you on exploitations of these people if they speak the languages, right? We tell you that they can act on it. They can act on these laws. They can act on this exploitation if they actually knew to forward their laws to international parties by speaking the language like English and such, because they do not understand how they want to forward those laws without actually speaking the language. Fifth rebuttal, how they try to tell you on the long run benefit on how local industries can prosper and such. We tell you that you only in the industries that can prosper, it will only be mutually exclusive to your own country, and will never be on par with other countries that are already developing and becoming very advanced in their technology and such. We tell you that these things, you further segregate countries from the development and from the gap of like the developing countries and such. So moving on to my first issue, no thank you, on who better helps post-colonial states. What did government tell you? They try to tell you on economic growth and such isn't important in as you still being seen as a colonized state and such. On secondly, how they try to tell you on we will always continuously rely on these colonized states, and we think that that's not good, right? What did we tell you? We told you that the process of the the dependency of towards colonized countries would just be something that is short term, right? We tell you that in the long run you no longer need to be dependent because you already have your businesses, all the research that you have to an international level. We tell you that it's just a stepping stone for you to gaining those international success. Secondly, we already told you that even if we tell you that all the benefits that are mutually exclusive under our side will still happen better, because we tell you that all this the language is only the barrier for you to gaining like international recognition, and also for you to get economic growth and stuff. Better trading ports are being made because you can speak the languages, and more people will actually acknowledge and help these post-colonial states. Why do we win on this issue, right? Firstly, we ensure that the post-colonial country have a good future. We tell you that they become better and they can develop on those technologies that they are not good at. Secondly, when actually government didn't even have an alternative as to how they better help post-colonial states in getting the development or getting the progression that they need. But on our side, we still tell you that all these benefits are still existent because you adopt the language in the first place. So what are the direct benefits, right? We already told you that firstly, you get international business, international collaboration with other countries because you speak the same language. Secondly, we ensure economic growth towards countries that are not in line with all this progression in the first place. So let's compare on the two worlds, right? We tell you on our side, we give opportunities to the country to prosper, to get international recognition and all of those things. We tell you that we help countries become better and shine on an international level. But on your side, you only let them shine, even if they shine only to looking within themselves and not actually getting the development. So the conclusion here is the only way for countries to prosper is always relating back to their colonizers, which is like the barrier. Before I move on to the second issue, yes.
Two questions. EU and ASEAN still does not use a common language, yet free trade still happens. Second question. Festivals like the Cannes Film Festival use their own national language to promote culture. So why does this not happen in our world?
We tell you that the two questions there are already like mutually exclusive to our side, because we tell you that like most of the benefits that they get, the majority of countries who actually adapt the language get more benefits. So like the minor is not too. Okay, second issue is on the moral of colonizers, right? What did the government tell you? They told you that they shouldn't adopt the language due to their immoral and their sufferings and such. They shouldn't adopt what the colonizers have did to them. What did we tell you? We told you that all things have left us to a reason for us to become a better. Because of this, Malaysia now can use because of the British colonizing them, Malaysia now can learn how to use your resources to make trade off with like Arabic countries and such. We tell you that all of this was a stepping stone for them to gaining the future benefits. We tell you that we can't change history, but we can make the benefit out of it. So why do we win this issue? We prove colonizers did give the benefits to them, even if it was in a hard and harsh way. We tell you that even though they left the scar, we tell you that this scar was the very reason that they are going to be prosperous today. Secondly, the dependency doesn't mean you're still colonized, because even you just need to because you're not continuously be dependent, but it's just for you to get the road to be power with the international countries like Japan and Europe who are better at all this. So the benefits are we provide you better living standards towards individuals on the ground. Secondly, we have the ability for society to prosper as well. So the comparison here is the trade-off that we make is these people can have better living standards, and the progression is very more visible, and we can ensure that the negotiation and language is no longer a barrier towards these post-colonial states. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First four speakers.